Alekhine, one of the deadliest attackers who ever lived, hurls a knight at the enemy king. So why is he the one who loses? Bern, 1925. Michel slides a pawn to d4 and claims the center. Across the board sits Alekhine, 2 years from the world crown. Black fires back at once, knight to f6, staring straight into the center. Michel develops calmly, knight to f3, no drama yet, just two heavyweights circling. Now Alekhine strikes at the middle, pawn to c5, challenging white's grip right away. Calm and unbothered, white answers with a pawn to e3, building a solid frame. Out comes the d-pawn to d5, Alekhine stakes his own claim in the center. White's other knight steps to d2, quietly reinforcing, in no hurry at all. Alekhine's bishop swings out to f5, hunting an open diagonal. The pieces are waking up. The bishop slides to e2 for white, nothing flashy, everything in its place. A pawn creeps to e6, Alekhine cementing his structure, patient and precise. King to safety, white castles kingside, the king tucking onto g1 well before any storm. Overcomes the knight to d7, Alekhine's army is almost fully out. Here it is, the first jab, Michel pushes c4, finally hitting back at black's center. Pointing at the king, Alekhine's bishop settles on d6, menacing white's castle. Capture! White's pawn grabs on d5, tearing the center wide open. Back comes the pawn, black retakes on d5, line splitting open across the board. Pressing the attack, white's pawn takes on c5, jamming deep into black's territory. The knight swoops to c5 for black, scooping the pawn right back, even again. Into the heart of the board goes white's knight to d4, dominating from the center. Quietly the bishop pulls back to d7, Alekhine keeping his forces knit tight. Michel's bishop leaps to b5, pinning and pestering, angling to swap off a defender. Finally Alekhine castles, the king sliding to g8, both monarchs tucked away at last. White's bishop snaps off the bishop on d7, trading down and simplifying. The queen takes back on d7, black's most powerful piece steps into the open. Repositioning smoothly, white's knight returns to f3, giving nothing away. Onto the open file, black's rook to c8, stacking up quiet pressure. Michel's last bishop emerges to d2, completing his setup at last. Boom, the knight leaps to e4, Alekhine spearing a piece deep into white's half. White's queen lifts to e2, lending support, keeping an eye on that bold knight. Black nudges a pawn to a6, taking a square away, subtle, but purposeful. Rook to c1 for white, fighting hard for control of that open file. Now Alekhine's second knight darts to g4, the great attacker smells blood near the king. Sensing danger, white slides the bishop back to e1, shoring up the defenses. Forward storms the f-pawn to f5, Alekhine is prying open lines toward white's king. Michel pokes h3, asking the g4 knight a very hard question. The knight retreats to f6, Alekhine reloading, not backing down for real. White reroutes a knight to d2, shuffling the defense, holding the fort. Every piece joins the hunt, black's rook lifts to e8, fully loaded now. Defenses up, white parks a knight on f1, bracing for the assault. Crash, the f-pawn smashes to f4, Alekhine tearing straight at white's shelter. White repositions again, rook to c2, building a defensive lift. Alekhine's knight leaps to g5, joining the swarm, three pieces breathing on white's king. All hands on deck, white's rook to d1, the full force assembled. Open it goes, black's pawn captures on e3, smashing the door near white's king. Michel's knight scoops up the pawn on e3, plugging the gap, but the pressure is brutal. And here's the bombshell, Alekhine sacrifices the knight, taking on h3 with check. The king stands exposed. White has to take, the pawn snatches the knight on h3, and now the king is laid bare. Alekhine's queen swoops to h3, grabbing the pawn, hunting the king up close. Defending desperately, white swings the queen to f3, guarding the shattered kingside. Check! The queen slams down to h2, Alekhine lunges straight for white's throat. Michel's king sidesteps to f1, coolly, calmly walking out of the fire. Another piece piles in, black's knight to e4, searching for the killer blow. Watch this, Michel's knight rockets to f5. Out of nowhere, white is the one attacking. Forced to react, Alekhine shoves a pawn to g6, kicking the knight, but his kingside is crumbling. In come the reinforcements, white's knight to g4, throwing another attacker at the king. Out of steam, black slides the queen to f4, desperate now to trade pieces down. Queen's off, White captures on f4, and black's biggest threat simply vanishes. Back comes the bishop, retaking on f4, but the attack is dead and buried. Counter-attack. White's knight jumps to h6 with check. The tables have completely turned. Alekhine's king shuffles to g7, dodging the check, but the noose keeps tightening. Raking a long diagonal, White's bishop swings to b4, deep into black's position. Disaster. Alekhine lifts the rook to f6. Grabbing the knight on h6 with the bishop kept black alive. This throws the game away. Instantly White punishes, the rook snatches the pawn on d5, and the floodgates swing open. Alekhine finally grabs the knight on h6 with the bishop. Too late, the damage is done. Michel's rook slams to d7 with check, barreling onto the 7th rank after the king. Alekhine's king flees to h8, cornered, with nowhere left to run. There it is, the knockout. White's second rook thunders to c7, doubling on the 7th. Black's king is trapped, and the legend Alekhine falls.